Today, digital currencies are on the rise as Bitcoin crosses the $97,000 mark for the first time since November. Pakistan enters a crypto payments deal with a subsidiary of World Liberty Financial. And Faryar Shirzad, Chief Policy Officer at Coinbase, shares what he thinks about the Senate Banking Committee's crypto market structure bill ahead of its markup on Capitol Hill. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Talia Kaplan. Major cryptocurrencies in the green, with Bitcoin rising to the $97,000 level as of noon Eastern, ahead of the Senate Banking Committee's market structure legislation markup tomorrow. The last time Bitcoin traded above that level was on November 14th, when it reached a high above $100,000. Ether, meanwhile, climbed nearly 6% and XRP rose nearly 3%. Okay, let's talk about the top stories. Pakistan has entered an agreement with a subsidiary of the Trump family's crypto company World Liberty Financial. According to the Pakistan government's official X account, the country's Minister for Finance and World Liberty Financial CEO Zachary Witkoff signed an agreement between Pakistan and SC Financial Technologies, an affiliated entity of World Liberty, for digital cross-border payment architectures. Pakistani Prime Minister Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif was also present during the signing. We reached out to WLFI requesting more information about its affiliation to SC Financial, but didn't hear back right away. Now, World Liberty Financial is a crypto platform launched during President Trump's 2024 election run, founded by Trump and his sons, along with Stephen and Zach Witkoff. A footnote mentions Donald Trump and Steve Witkoff were removed upon taking office. Zach Witkoff is the son of Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East under President Trump. Next, new data from Chainalysis reveals that scams involving impersonation and AI tools helped drive at least $17 billion in losses last year. The report notes that impersonation scams grew 1,400% compared to the year before, reflecting a sharp shift toward fraud that exploits trust in governments, brands, and institutions. Chainalysis also found that scams linked to AI tools generated 4.5 times more revenue than scams without observable AI links. That suggests higher efficiency and broader victim reach. Average scam payments rose more than 250% year over year, from around $780 in 2024 to about $2,700 in 2025, which Chainalysis says shows rising severity even as tactics diversify. All right, for our main story, as the Senate gets ready to mark up crypto legislation tomorrow, I spoke with Faryar Shirzad, Chief Policy Officer at Coinbase, about his thoughts on the Senate Banking Committee's text of a crypto market structure bill. He also weighs in on the provisions listed for stablecoins, as the text sets up a showdown between banks and the digital asset industry over stablecoin rewards. This week, we got a full look at proposed market structure legislation ahead of its markup tomorrow, when the Senate Banking Committee released the full text of the bill on Monday night. Now, I want to start off by pointing to a portion of the bill which prohibits stablecoin issuers from offering rewards simply for holding stablecoins. Instead, according to the proposed legislation, those rewards have to be offered through the completion of a transaction or something like a rewards program. And that is a win for the banking industry, which urged Congress to close what they deemed a loophole in the Genius Act that allowed intermediaries to pay interest on stablecoins. Banks argue that this would lead to a flight of deposits from the insured banking system, potentially threatening financial stability. And crypto companies, especially Coinbase, have been fighting back against that claim. In fact, a few months ago, Coinbase launched a 6-figure marketing campaign targeting concerns from banks over stablecoin rewards. So what do you think about this development tied to stablecoin rewards?
The Genius Act was really a historic piece of legislation, and what it did was allow the United States to be on the cutting edge of moving payments to blockchain-based financial rails. And why is that important? Because it essentially de-risks payments, and it takes about the $200 billion that we now pay for payment processing and wrenches most of that cost out of the system. And that's good for consumers, it's good for economic growth, it's good for economic efficiency. So we understand that the bank lobby is very good at persuading members of Congress to protect its incumbency, but our focus is very much on protecting the interests of consumers, and that means making sure there are as few frictions as possible on the adoption of stablecoins for consumers and for the public. And so we're looking at the broader package. The bill text only came out a few days ago, or only yesterday at midnight, and so we're evaluating it, but we want to make sure the system works.
Now, digital currency lobbying group Stand with Crypto, which was set up by Coinbase ahead of last year's presidential election, took to X to write that the group was on the Hill yesterday advocating for crypto rewards. I understand that Stand with Crypto sent around 230,000 emails to senators in the past week. What does that signal to you, and what are some of the main topics the lobbying group has been advocating for other than stablecoin rewards?
Yeah, Stand with Crypto is extraordinary. I think their campaign has been going on for maybe 2 days, 3 days, and I think the number is actually 250,000 contacts have been made with Senate offices, so emails, phone calls, and it just tells you that crypto generally and stablecoins are very much of a grassroots issue. So you've had a number of bank CEOs calling their senators and kind of using their influence to try to get their way in this process, but at the same time you've had several 100,000 Americans step up and say they want a fairer, more democratized financial system, and that stablecoin should be a central part of that. So we feel very good about the public speaking up, and the question is whether the Senate legislation ultimately reflects the interests of the incumbent interests or the interests of the American public.
Now, there are reports out today that U.S. senators filed amendments ahead of the crypto market structure hearing tomorrow. Has Coinbase been pushing for any amendments to the crypto bill other than the one tied to the topic of stablecoin rewards? Has Coinbase been lobbying for any other specific changes to the bill since the text came out on Monday?
Well, the bill language, I think it's about 270 pages. We got it on Tuesday night, and so it's just an extensive legislative effort. We're enormously grateful to Chairman Scott, Subcommittee Chairman Lummis, and their staffs, because they've done amazing work in trying to put together as comprehensive a piece of legislation as possible. But the details matter, and so we're going through it. There are a number of things in the draft text that cause us enormous concern. We've been articulating that to the staff, and some of those we were able to bring to light after the amendment deadline process. So we're sort of in Chairman Scott's hands over what the right path forward is to make sure we get a legislation that's good for the American people rather than a step backwards. And so we're sort of seeing what the right way it is to get the bill to where it needs to be.
And yeah, the Senate Banking Committee's text includes sweeping provisions for stablecoins, as we noted, DeFi protocols, and tokenized stocks, to name a few. Senator Cynthia Lummis, the Senate Banking Digital Assets Subcommittee chair, took to X to urge lawmakers to get the bill across the finish line, noting that the Clarity Act represents true bipartisan collaboration with every provision reflecting input from both sides of the aisle. Overall, what did you think about the bill's language? Does it incorporate most of what you were hoping to see? And do you think it will, in fact, get across the finish line in its current form, as Senator Lummis is hoping for?
I think we'll get market structure legislation. I mean, the path to getting a bill passed is a complicated one, and there's a number of steps forward, a number of steps back. And so we're prepared over the longer term to kind of get this across the line. But look, it is generally a very good piece of legislation, but there's some real issues within it that Senator Lummis, Chairman Scott, others are aware of, and we're working with them to try to address them. I'll give you one example. There's language in that effectively locks the SEC's hands and prevents them from taking the steps necessary to allow the tokenization of equity markets. I think that would be a big mistake. I'm not sure who would support that. But somehow it's in the bill text. And so it's details like that that have big historically consequential impacts that we're identifying and we're talking to the committee about, and we're working with them on trying to resolving them. So good, a very, very good effort overall, but some specific things that really need to be addressed.
Now, I understand you were in fact involved in some of the discussions on Capitol Hill surrounding crypto market structure. Do you feel like lawmakers took some of your suggestions to heart? Did you notice anything Coinbase was advocating for in the text?
Well, for sure. I mean, look, you have to step back and remember, we went from a year ago being under attack by the administration in office and a Congress that really didn't understand why this was important, to where we are now, where we're sort of at the culmination of a 5-month effort in the Senate with, something on the order of 15, 20 plus senators spending hundreds of hours themselves and thousands of staff hours to try to get a bill right. So we're hugely grateful for the work that's been done. The details matter, and so we're just in the process of helping refine those details. But really, really important work, and very heartened by the bipartisanship. This may be, crypto, I think, is the most bipartisan issue in Washington these days, and I think that's really, something to be celebrated.
Focusing on the topic of DeFi, the bill directs the SEC and Treasury to create specific rules that clarify how a person or group who control a DeFi trading protocol complies with regulatory requirements like disclosure, record keeping, and securities laws. The Treasury also has to define how DeFi platforms comply with the Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering rules. What do you think about the bill and how it tackles the topic of DeFi?
DeFi is so consequential. Ultimately, this whole fight is ultimately about, just like the internet, creating a system that allows people on a democratized basis to be able to transfer value, and that all of that will happen on DeFi infrastructure. And so making sure that truly decentralized crypto infrastructure on which you and I, for example, could transfer value, whether it's a payment or it's a transaction of a crypto token, or if it's a movement of anything else of value, that remains allowed and unfettered. And so we're very much focused on that. There's obviously a legitimate issue to make sure that people can't just pretend that it's a decentralized protocol and try to avoid regulatory obligations when there's some sort of custodial activity. And so we respect what the committees are trying to do on the registration side. On the AML side, it's really important that we not create a framework of surveillance where if you have a peer-to-peer transaction, you and I want to engage in a transaction, there can't be a built-in presumptive surveillance layer that the government imposes. We don't have that in traditional payments. If you and I transact, if I mow your lawn and you give me $20, the government has no presumptive right of surveillance, and we need to make sure that on the BSA stuff we don't build that kind of presumption into the next generation of payment and value transfer technology.
Final thought, what do you anticipate will happen with the markup tomorrow? And now that we're seeing progress for crypto market structure regulation on Capitol Hill, what's your timeline for when you think we could see rules of the road for crypto become law here in the U.S.? Do you think it can happen this year, even with Congress already shifting its focus on the 2026 midterm elections in which the Democrats could take the House?
Look, decisions about Senate process are really above our pay grade. I mean, our job is really to be the experts in the industry and the technology, and share our expertise with policymakers as they try to figure out the path forward. So we're optimistic, though. The amount of interest there is and time invested to get legislation through has been impressive. And so we'll work with senators on both sides to get to an outcome. And one thing to keep in mind is that even as we work on legislation, the agencies in the United States, but also regulators around the world, are one step after the other establishing more and more clarity around how crypto markets operate. And so legislation is enormously important in the United States, but the regulatory action is quite consequential too. And so we're heartened by the fact that incrementally, week by week, month by month, we're getting the regulatory clarity that the sector needs, and that's really important.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.